Captain Jake Morrison stood at the window of his quarters aboard the massive space station, called Concordia Prime, and watched the stars shine in the darkness of space. The station was bigger than any city he had ever seen on Earth, and it moved round the planet Kepler-4 to be like a metal moon. Inside this giant structure lived beings from 847 different worlds, and they all had one thing in common today. They were here to judge humanity. Jake wore his best blue uniform with the gold stripes that showed his rank as captain in the Earth Navy. His short brown hair was neat, and his green eyes looked tired because he had not slept well in 3 days. He was 35 years old and had spent half his life fighting in space battles to protect human colonies from pirates and raiders. Now he faced a different kind of battle, and this one could end everything humans had built among the stars. Behind him sat Dr. Lisa Carter at a small desk covered with data tablets and files. She was reading through reports about alien biology and making notes with quick movements of her pen. Lisa had long black hair tied back in a simple style and wore the white coat that marked her as a scientist. Her brown eyes moved fast as she read, because she wanted to learn everything she could about the aliens who would judge them. She was 29 years old and the smartest person Jake had ever met. The door to their quarters opened, and Ambassador Rick Taylor walked in, followed by Commander Beth Adams. Rick was a tall man with gray hair and a face that showed he had spent many years dealing with difficult people. He wore the black suit that all Earth diplomats used when they met with aliens. Beth was shorter with red hair and blue eyes that missed nothing. Her green uniform had the marks of someone who had fought in many battles and won most of them. Rick sat down heavily in a chair and looked at the others with worry in his eyes. Tomorrow the trial would begin, and he would have to defend humanity against charges that could destroy their future in space. The aliens said humans had broken 17 different laws that governed how species were supposed to behave in the galaxy. Some of these laws were thousands of years old and made by aliens who thought humans were too dangerous to be free. Beth walked to the window and stood next to Jake. She had been his second in command for 5 years, and they had fought side by side in the Outer Rim Wars, where human ships protected alien traders from attack. Now those same aliens were part of the council that wanted to put humans in a cage made of energy that would trap them on their own worlds forever. The biggest charges against humanity were about terraforming planets without permission from the Galactic Council. Humans had taken 17 dead worlds and made them into places where people could live and grow food. The aliens said this was against the law because humans had not asked first. They also said humans made artificial intelligence computers that were too smart and dangerous. The worst charge was that humans built weapons that could travel faster than light, and this scared the older alien races. Jake knew the real reason for the trial was fear. The 3 most powerful alien species in the galaxy were afraid of how fast humans learned new things and spread to new worlds. The Vorthik were made of living crystal and had ruled space for 10,000 years. The Luminari were beings of pure energy who thought they were better than everyone else. The Zerati were like a giant mind made of billions of small creatures who all thought the same thoughts. These 3 old races had controlled the galaxy for so long that they forgot what it was like to be young and want to explore. They saw humans building new colonies and making new inventions, and they were scared that humans would become too powerful to control. The trial was their way of stopping human progress before it went too far. Lisa looked up from her reading and spoke in a quiet voice about what she had learned. The Galactic Council had put other young species on trial before, and most of them had been found guilty. Those species were now trapped on their home worlds or had become servants to the older races. Only 3 species had escaped punishment, and they did it by giving up their independence and becoming part of the ancient empires. Rick stood up and walked around the room as he thought about strategy. He knew the trial was not really about justice, but about power. The older aliens wanted to stay in control, and they saw humanity as a threat to their authority. Tomorrow he would have to prove that humans deserved to be free, and that their rapid growth was good for the galaxy, not dangerous to it. Beth checked her watch and reminded everyone that they needed to get some sleep before the trial began. In the morning they would enter the Great Hall, where representatives from hundreds of worlds would decide if humanity had a future among the stars, or would be locked away forever. Jake took one last look at the stars outside and made a promise that he would fight for every human family living on the colony worlds that might be cut off from Earth if they lost this trial. The Great Hall of the Galactic Council was a massive dome that could hold 50,000 beings, and every seat was filled. Jake Morrison walked into the hall wearing his dress uniform and felt the weight of hundreds of different alien eyes watching him. The air smelled strange because so many different species breathed different gases, and the life support systems mixed them all together to keep everyone alive. At the center of the hall stood a raised platform where the human delegation would present their defense. Around them in rising circles sat the representatives of 847 worlds. Some aliens looked like humans, but with different colored skin or extra arms. Others were so strange that Jake could not guess how they lived or what they ate. Giant creatures with tentacles sat next to small beings that glowed with their own light. Flying aliens hung from the ceiling while others floated in tanks of water. High Arbiter Zelftar of the Vortex stood at the prosecution platform, and his crystal body caught the light from above and threw rainbow colors across the walls. He was 12 feet tall, and his voice sounded like breaking glass when he spoke. Next to him stood two other prosecutors from the Luminari and Zerati races. The Luminari looked like a bright star wrapped in a dark robe, while the Zerati representative was a swarm of small creatures that moved together like a living cloud. Professor Alan Hughes sat at the defense table with thick books of galactic law stacked in front of him. He was an old man with white hair and had spent 40 years studying how the different species made rules for living together in space. His hands shook a little as he turned pages, because he knew how important this trial was for every human alive. Lieutenant Sam Brooks stood behind the human delegation ready to help with anything they needed. He was young and nervous, but tried to hide it by standing very straight and keeping his face blank. This was his first time off Earth, and he had never seen so many aliens in one place before. Ambassador Rick Taylor rose from his chair and walked to the speaking platform. In the center of the hall, the noise from thousands of alien voices talking at once slowly became quiet, as everyone waited to hear what he would say. Rick had practiced this speech many times, but now with all eyes on him, he felt his heart beating fast. Rick spoke clearly, and his voice carried to every corner of the Great Hall. He said that humanity did not deny the charges, but they would show that everything humans did was necessary for their survival and helped make the galaxy a better place. He explained that humans were a young species who learned quickly and worked hard, but they always tried to help others when they could. Drive Karen White was called as the first witness for the defense. She was an expert on terraforming and had helped turn 5 dead planets into green worlds where humans could live. Karen was a small woman with blonde hair, and she wore the brown uniform of the Colonial Engineering Corps. Her voice was steady as she explained to the council how human terraforming worked. Karen showed the aliens pictures of the 17 worlds that humans had terraformed. Before humans arrived, these planets were dead rocks with no air to breathe and no water to drink. Some were too cold and covered with ice, while others were too hot with poisonous gases in their atmosphere. No other species in the galaxy wanted these worlds because they could not live there. She explained how human scientists and engineers spent years studying each planet to understand how to make it safe for life. They brought special bacteria that could change the air and planted tough grasses that could grow in bad soil. Slowly, over many decades, they turned these dead worlds into places where families could build homes and grow food. The most important point Karen made was that 3 of the terraformed worlds now had alien colonies too. The Alterans had built cities on New Kansas after humans made the air breathable. The Benton traders used New Singapore as a supply station for their merchant ships. The Corvani refugees lived on New Montana after their own world was destroyed by a space disaster. High Arbiter Zelftar stood up, and his crystal body flashed with angry red light. He said that humans had broken the law by changing planets without asking permission first. The old laws said that any species who wanted to change a world had to get approval from the Galactic Council before they started work. This process usually took 50 years and many requests were denied. Zelftar argued that humans were too impatient to follow proper procedures, and they acted like they owned any planet they could reach. He said this kind of behavior was dangerous because it showed humans did not respect the authority of the older species, who had made the laws to keep peace in the galaxy. Captain Jake Morrison asked permission to speak and walked to the center platform. He looked around at all the alien faces watching him and thought about the human families living on the colony worlds. He spoke about children playing in parks on planets that used to be frozen wastelands. He talked about farmers growing food on worlds that used to be lifeless rocks. Jake told the council that humans did not terraform planets to show disrespect for galactic law. They did it because their species needed room to grow, and these dead worlds were not being used by anyone else. He said that when humans made a world livable, they always shared it with any other species who needed a place to live. His words seemed to have an effect on some of the younger species in the council. Several alien delegates leaned forward to listen more carefully, and a few nodded their heads in agreement. But the three ancient races who brought the charges looked unmoved, and Zelftar's crystal body continued to glow with angry light. The first day of testimony ended with both sides having made their opening statements. As the human delegation left the Great Hall, Jake could hear thousands of aliens talking in dozens of different languages about what they had heard. Some voices sounded supportive, but others seemed convinced that humans were too dangerous to be allowed freedom among the stars. Dr. Lisa Carter walked to the center of the Great Hall carrying a data pad filled with information that could save humanity's future. The second day of the trial had begun, and she would present evidence of all the good things humans had done for other species in the galaxy. Her hands were steady even though she knew that millions of lives depended on what she said in the next hour. Behind her on the platform stood Captain Roy Nelson, who commanded the first human ship to make contact with the Vorthok 20 years ago. He was a big man with gray hair and scars on his face from fighting space pirates. Next to him, Dr. Amy Foster wore the white coat of a medical researcher and held files containing records of all the alien lives she had helped save. Lisa activated her data pad, and holographic images appeared in the air above the platform showing scenes from across the galaxy. The first image was a hospital on Proxima Station, where human doctors worked alongside alien medical staff to treat patients from dozens of different species. The alien delegates in the council could see human and alien children playing together in the hospital waiting areas. She explained that 3 years ago, a terrible disease had spread through several alien colonies and threatened to kill millions of beings. The sickness affected the nervous systems of carbon-based life forms, and no known cure existed. Dr. Foster and her team of human researchers worked for 6 months without rest to develop a treatment that could save both humans and aliens. Dr. Foster stepped forward and spoke about how her team studied the disease by examining samples from infected patients. They tested hundreds of different medicines and treatments until they found one that worked. The cure was given freely to any species that needed it, and human medical ships carried the treatment to 30 different worlds. The holographic display showed alien families whose children had been saved by human medicine. Parents from the Alteran species held their young ones who would have died without Dr. Foster's cure. Traders from the Betan worlds sent messages thanking the human doctors who had saved their crews from the disease. Lisa continued by showing how human agriculture experts had helped end famines on 6 different worlds. When the plant disease called Red Death destroyed the food crops on Kepler 186b, the human colony ship Endeavour shared their seed banks with the alien population. Human farmers taught the Corvani refugees how to grow earth plants that could survive in the harsh soil of their new home world. The most impressive evidence was about human engineering achievements that benefited the entire galaxy. When the power generators on Proxima Station began to fail, the alien managers asked human engineers for help. The station provided energy to 17 different worlds, and if it stopped working, millions of beings would die. Human engineer teams led by Captain Nelson, worked for 2 months to rebuild the power systems using new technology that was more efficient and safer than the old designs. They asked for no payment and shared their engineering knowledge with alien technical teams so they could maintain the improved systems. Lisa showed the council recordings of the moment when the new power generators came online and brought light back to 17 worlds. Alien voices could be heard cheering and thanking the human teams who had saved their homes from darkness and cold. High Arbiter Zelftar rose from his crystal throne, and his body flashed with bright light as he prepared to challenge the human evidence. He admitted that humans had done some helpful things, but argued that their actions were unpredictable and dangerous. He said that a species who could create such powerful weapons and technology could not be trusted to remain peaceful. The prosecution displayed their own holographic images showing human military ships in battle formations. The weapons on these ships could destroy entire planets, and their shields could withstand attacks from whole fleets. Zelftar argued that humans built these warships not for defense, but to intimidate other species and force them to accept human expansion. Commander Beth Adams requested permission to respond to the military charges and walked to the center platform wearing her combat uniform, with ribbons showing her service record. She was not as tall as the alien prosecutors, but her voice carried clearly to every corner of the Great Hall. When she spoke about human military actions, Beth showed the council battle recordings from the Outer Rim conflicts where human naval forces had fought to protect alien merchant ships from pirate attacks. In one battle, the human destroyer Intrepid had been outnumbered 5-1, but still engaged the pirates to give an alien convoy time to escape. The ship was destroyed, but all the alien traders survived. She presented testimony from alien cargo captains who said human patrol ships had saved their crews from raiders dozens of times. The human navy asked for nothing in return except permission to maintain small bases where their ships could refuel and repair battle damage. The most powerful evidence came from the defense of the Zerati colony world Hive 7 when it was attacked by unknown aliens from outside the galaxy. Human battle fleets had responded to the distress call even though Earth was 3 weeks' travel away. 12 human ships were lost in the fighting, but the Zerati colony was saved. Beth reminded the council that the same Zerati leaders who now prosecuted humanity had once sent official thanks to Earth for saving millions of their people. She asked why human military strength was being called dangerous when it had been used repeatedly to protect innocent lives throughout the galaxy. Several alien delegates began talking among themselves, and the noise level in the Great Hall increased as different species debated what they had heard. Some of the younger civilizations seemed impressed by the evidence of human helpfulness, while others appeared worried about human military power. Lisa returned to the center platform for her final statement of the day. She told the council that humanity was not perfect and had made mistakes while learning to live among the stars, but she argued that humans always tried to help other species when they could, and had never used their power to conquer or enslave other beings. She reminded the aliens that humans shared their medical knowledge, freely gave away their agricultural techniques, and helped solve engineering problems without asking for payment or political control. She said this showed that human nature was fundamentally good, and that restricting their freedom would harm not just humans, but all the species. They might help in the future. As the second day of testimony ended, Jake Morrison felt more hopeful than he had since the trial began. The evidence of human achievements was strong, and some alien delegates seemed to be reconsidering their positions. But he knew the 3 ancient races who brought the charges were not easily convinced, and tomorrow would bring new challenges to humanity's defense. Agent Tony Clark moved through the dark corridors of Concordia Prime, like a shadow avoiding the main paths where security cameras watched for intruders. He wore the simple gray clothing of a station maintenance worker and carried tools that would let him access computer terminals without being detected. Tony had been working undercover for 3 months learning secrets that could change the outcome of the trial. Earlier that day, he had received a coded message from Counselor Vexhiev, the Alteran delegation asking to meet in secret. The Alterans were one of the younger species in the galaxy, and their people lived on worlds that humans had helped make habitable. Vex-High had information that could help humanity, but sharing it would put his own species at risk. Tony found the meeting place in a storage room deep in the industrial section of the station, where few beings ever traveled. The room smelled of machine oil and recycling chemicals and was filled with spare parts for the life support systems that kept the massive station running. Counselor Vex-High was waiting in the shadows wearing a dark cloak that hid his blue-scaled skin and forearms. Vex-High spoke in a whisper because even in this forgotten place there might be listening devices planted by the security forces. He told Tony that the trial against humanity was part of a much larger plan that had been going on for thousands of years. The three ancient species had been systematically limiting the growth of all younger civilizations to prevent them from becoming too powerful. The Alteran counselor explained that 17 other species had faced similar trials over the past millennium, and most had been found guilty of breaking galactic laws. These species were then forced to accept severe restrictions on their expansion and technological development. Only 3 civilizations had avoided punishment, and they did it by becoming client states of the ancient empires. Tony listened carefully as Vex-High revealed that he had found secret records showing how the Vorthik Luminari and Zerati worked together to control the galaxy. Any species that showed signs of rapid advancement or independent thinking was marked for limitation. The charges brought against these species were always technically legal, but the laws themselves were designed to prevent progress and maintain the power of the older races. The most shocking revelation was that the 3 ancient species had been suppressing scientific research across the galaxy for centuries. They controlled the major universities and research centers and made sure that younger species could not develop technologies that might challenge their authority. Human innovation represented everything they feared because humans learned quickly and refused to accept limitations. Vex-High gave Tony a data crystal containing copies of classified documents that proved the conspiracy. These files showed secret meetings between the ancient species where they planned which civilizations to target next. Humanity had been on their list for 20 years, but they had waited until humans spread to enough worlds to make the charges seem legitimate. Tony returned to the human quarters, where Captain Morrison and the others were preparing for the next day of testimony. When he revealed what he had learned, the room fell silent as everyone realized the true scope of what they were facing. This was not just a trial about human actions, but a fight for the right of all younger species to determine their own destiny. Ambassador Rick Taylor paced around the room as he considered this new information. Using the evidence Tony had gathered would expose the conspiracy, but it would also make permanent enemies of the 3 most powerful civilizations in the galaxy. If the plan failed, humanity would face much worse consequences than simple restrictions on their expansion. Drive Lisa Carter studied the data crystal and found records of other species who had been targeted by the ancient races. The Corvani had been forced to abandon 12 colonies after their trial. The Betan traders could only operate in designated shipping lanes and were forbidden from developing faster-than-light communication systems. The Zenithians had been completely isolated on their home world for 300 years. Commander Beth Adams argued that they had no choice but to use this evidence, because the alternative was accepting defeat and watching humanity become another client state of the ancient empires. She pointed out that many of the younger species in the council were probably facing similar pressures and might support humanity if they knew the truth about the conspiracy. Jake Morrison made the decision to take the risk and expose the plot. During tomorrow's testimony, he knew it might anger the ancient species enough to make them vote for even harsher punishment, but he also believed that the truth was humanity's best defense. If other species learned that they were also targets, they might join together to resist the control of the older races. Professor Alan Hughes worked through the night studying the legal implications of the conspiracy evidence. He found precedents in galactic law that could be used to challenge the authority of the ancient species to bring charges against humanity. If he could prove that the trial was part of an illegal pattern of suppressing younger civilizations the entire case might be dismissed. Lieutenant Sam Brooks helped prepare copies of the evidence for distribution to friendly delegates. In the council, several younger species had already expressed private support for humanity and might be willing to stand up publicly if they had proof of the conspiracy. The risk was that the ancient species might retaliate against any civilization that opposed. Then, as dawn approached on Concordia Prime, the human delegation prepared for what could be the most important day in their species' history. They would reveal the truth about the conspiracy and ask the council to judge not just humanity's actions, but the right of all species to grow and explore without interference from those who claimed to know better. Tony Clark checked his equipment one more time and prepared to provide security for the human delegation. During the upcoming confrontation, he knew that exposing the conspiracy would make him and the others targets for assassination attempts by agents working for the ancient species. The stakes had just become much higher than a simple trial about galactic law violations. The third day of the trial would determine whether humanity would win their freedom or face consequences worse than anything they had imagined when the charges were first brought against them. High Arbiter Zelftar stood at the prosecution platform, with his crystal body glowing brighter than ever before as he prepared to make his final argument against humanity. The Great Hall was completely silent as thousands of alien delegates waited to hear what he would say. His voice echoed through the dome like breaking glass as he challenged the humans to prove they could be civilized according to galactic standards. Zelftar declared that humanity's greatest flaw was their refusal to accept limitations and stay within proper boundaries. He argued that humans were like children who did not understand the dangers of playing with powerful forces. Their rapid expansion and constant innovation threatened the careful balance that had kept peace in the galaxy for 10,000 years. The Crystal Prosecutor displayed holographic images showing human colonies spreading across space like an infection that could not be controlled. He pointed out that in just 2 centuries humans had expanded to more worlds than most species reached in a millennium. This kind of growth was unnatural and dangerous because it put strain on resources and shipping routes that other species depended upon. Colonel Pete Davis was called to testify for the defense and walked to the center platform, wearing his dress uniform with medals from the colonial wars. He was a tough-looking man with scars on his face and hands that showed he had fought many battles to protect human settlements from raiders and hostile aliens. His voice was steady and strong as he spoke about human military tradition. Pete told the council that humans did not fight because they enjoyed war, but because they would not abandon people who needed protection. He showed recordings of human soldiers risking their lives to evacuate alien civilians from disaster zones and combat areas. In every case, the humans asked for nothing in return except the right to help those who could not help themselves. The most powerful testimony came from Dr. Julia Mason, who was both a philosopher and an expert on human behavior. She was a small woman with gray hair and kind eyes who had spent her life studying why humans acted the way they did. When she spoke about human nature, her words carried the wisdom of someone who truly understood her own species. Julia explained to the council that humans did not expand and innovate because of aggression or greed, but because of an inner drive to grow, learn, and help others do the same. She said that trying to contain humanity would be like trying to contain hope itself, because humans believed that tomorrow could always be better than today if people worked hard enough to make it happen. She argued that human restlessness and refusal to accept limits were not flaws, but the greatest strengths of their species. When humans encountered problems, they did not give up or accept defeat, but instead found new ways to overcome obstacles. This trait had allowed them to survive and thrive in environments that would destroy other species. Dr. Mason presented examples of human achievements that came from their unwillingness to accept that something was impossible. When told that certain diseases could not be cured, human doctors kept working until they found treatments. When engineers said a planet could not be terraformed, human scientists developed new techniques that proved them wrong. The most important point she made was that humans did not keep their discoveries to themselves but shared them freely with anyone who needed help. Every medical breakthrough, every agricultural improvement, and every engineering innovation was offered to other species without asking for payment or political control. High Arbiter Zelftar interrupted Dr. Mason's testimony to argue that human unpredictability made them dangerous allies and impossible partners. He presented scenarios showing how human expansion could destabilize the established order and lead to conflicts between different species competing for the same resources. Ambassador Rick Taylor rose from his chair and requested permission to address the Crystal Prosecutor directly. The tension in the Great Hall increased as the two beings faced each other, representing completely different views of how galactic civilization should work. Rick spoke calmly, but his words carried the weight of humanity's entire future. Taylor argued that the very thing the prosecution saw as humanity's greatest flaw was actually their greatest strength and the quality that made them valuable members of galactic society. He said that the older species had become so focused on maintaining stability that they had forgotten the importance of growth and progress. He challenged the Council to consider what the galaxy would be like if the ancient species had been restricted in their early development the way they now wanted to restrict humanity. The Vorthok would never have learned to manipulate crystal technology. The Luminari would not have mastered energy manipulation, and the Zerati would still be single-minded creatures. Instead of a collective intelligence, Rick presented the Council with evidence that human contact with other species had consistently led to beneficial exchanges of knowledge and culture. Human art, music, and literature had enriched the cultures of dozens of alien civilizations, while alien wisdom had helped humans become better at solving problems and understanding the universe. The ambassador's final argument was that restricting humanity would not just harm humans, but would deprive the entire galaxy of the contributions they could make in the future. He asked the Council if they really wanted to live in a universe where innovation was discouraged and young species were prevented from reaching their full potential. As Rick finished speaking, several alien delegates began talking among themselves, and the noise level in the hall increased dramatically. Some species seemed convinced by the human arguments, while others appeared more worried than ever about the potential consequences of allowing humanity to continue expanding freely. Councillor Vex High of the Alteran delegation requested permission to speak and rose from his seat with the data crystal Tony Clark had given him clutched in his for hands. The moment had come to reveal the conspiracy, and Jake Morrison felt his heart beating faster as he realized that everything now depended on whether the younger species would find the courage to stand up to the ancient powers. The fourth day of testimony was about to end with either humanity's greatest triumph or their final defeat, and no one in the Great Hall could predict which way the vote would go. When the Council made their decision, the Great Hall of the Galactic Council fell completely silent as the representatives from 847 worlds waited to hear the final verdict on humanity's future. Jake Morrison stood with his delegation at the center platform, feeling the weight of billions of human lives depending on what happened in the next few minutes. 3 days of deliberation had ended, and now the moment of truth had arrived. The vote-counting system displayed the results in glowing numbers above the dome, where everyone could see them. 423 species voted for restrictions on humanity, while 421 voted against with 3 abstentions. Jake felt his heart sink as he realized they had lost by only 2 votes, and humanity would face the same fate as so many other young species before them. High Arbiter Zelftar rose from his crystal throne with victory glowing in every facet of his body. He began to speak about the wisdom of the Council's decision and how restricting humanity would bring stability to the galaxy. But before he could finish his statement, Councillor Vex High of the Alteran delegation stood up and raised his forearms to request permission to address the assembly. Vex High's voice carried clearly through the hall as he formally accused the Vorthok Luminari and Zerati of conspiracy to suppress younger civilizations. He held up the data crystal containing evidence of secret meetings and illegal coordination between the 3 ancient species. The hall erupted in shocked voices as delegates from dozens of worlds began demanding to know what proof existed of these serious charges. 17 other species immediately rose to second the accusation against the ancient powers. These were all younger civilizations that had suspected they were being held back, but had never been able to prove it. The data crystal contained records showing that each of these species had been marked for limitation or control by the conspiracy. The evidence was overwhelming and undeniable. Secret communications between the ancient species revealed their plans to prevent any younger civilization from developing technologies or achieving expansion that might challenge their authority. The conspiracy had been operating for thousands of years and had successfully limited the growth of dozens of species. In a stunning reversal, the Galactic Council voted to suspend the trial against humanity while they investigated the charges of conspiracy. The ancient species found themselves facing the same kind of formal accusations they had brought against so many others. But High Arbiter Zelftar was not willing to accept this defeat so easily. The Crystal Prosecutor stood to his full 12-foot height and declared that legal procedures would take years to resolve while humanity continued to expand and threaten galactic stability. He invoked an ancient law that allowed disputes to be settled through single combat. With the fate of entire civilizations hanging in the balance, Zelftar challenged Captain Jake Morrison to face him in battle with humanity's freedom as the prize for victory. If Jake won, all charges against humanity would be dropped, and humans would be free to continue their expansion among the stars. If Zelftar won, humanity would accept even harsher restrictions than originally planned. Jake accepted the challenge, knowing that win or lose, humanity had already achieved something greater than simple freedom. They had inspired other species to stand up for their own rights and exposed a conspiracy that had held back galactic progress for millennia. The younger civilizations would never again quietly accept limitations imposed by those who claimed to know better. The combat arena was a circular platform in the center of the Great Hall, surrounded by energy barriers that would contain the battle. Zelftar's crystal body was nearly indestructible, and he could focus light into cutting beams that could slice through metal. Jake wore light armor and carried a plasma sword, but he was much smaller and weaker than his alien opponent. The battle began with Zelftar launching beams of focused light that Jake barely managed to dodge by rolling and jumping across the platform. The crystal being's attacks were powerful but slow because his massive body could not move quickly. Jake used his human agility and unpredictability to stay ahead of the deadly light beams. Jake realized that direct attacks would be useless against Zelftar's crystal armor, so he began looking for weaknesses in his opponent's structure. He noticed that certain frequencies of sound made the crystal body vibrate, and that impacts in specific locations caused small cracks to appear in the otherwise perfect surface. Using his plasma sword, Jake struck at the joints where different crystal segments connected while making high-pitched sounds that disrupted Zelftar's ability to focus his light beams. The combat became a test of human adaptability against alien strength, with Jake refusing to give up, even when facing what seemed like impossible odds. The turning point came when Jake managed to get inside Zelftar's reach and strike directly at the core crystal that powered the alien's body. The plasma sword penetrated the crystal armor and sent energy feedback through Zelftar's entire structure. The massive being stumbled and fell to the platform, with cracks spreading across his body like a broken window. As Zelftar lay defeated, he whispered that he finally understood why the ancient species feared humanity. Humans never knew when they were beaten and would keep fighting until they found a way to win or died trying. This quality made them unpredictable, dangerous, and ultimately unstoppable. The trial ended with humanity not only cleared of all charges, but appointed as protectors of younger species' rights throughout the galaxy. The Galactic Council established new laws preventing the suppression of technological and territorial development, with humans serving as the primary enforcers of these protections. Jake was promoted to Admiral and given command of the new Galactic Development Fleet that would help younger species explore and expand without interference from the ancient powers. Dr. Lisa Carter became the Council's chief science advisor, responsible for sharing human knowledge and innovation with any species that wanted to learn. Ambassador Rick Taylor was appointed as the first director of the Young Species Protection Agency, which would investigate and prevent future attempts to limit the growth of developing civilizations. The agency would have the power to bring charges against any species that tried to suppress the rights of others. The final scene showed Admiral Morrison standing on the bridge of his new flagship, looking out at the stars and knowing that humanity's greatest trial had become their greatest triumph. They had not won by proving they could be contained, but by proving that some things should never be contained at all. Human ships were launching to explore new frontiers, but now they carried representatives from dozens of other species who had chosen to join humanity's endless quest for growth, discovery, and the betterment of all sentient life in the galaxy.